Hello, and welcome to my first podcast episode. Today's going to be a solo-sode because, well, I don't have a real podcast, but I wish I did. No, but in all seriousness, today I want to talk about an issue that is actually very dear to my heart, and that is the treatment, or you could say mistreatment, of the environment, specifically when it comes to the agricultural system. The way we produce our food is ruining the planet and causing risk of us not being able to produce any food at all if it continues at the rate that it's going. My goal for this project is merely to make more people aware of the big picture, what really goes on behind the scenes in certain industries in America. It makes me so sad that in this country you can basically pay to have things go your way, certain things to go your way. Now, this sort of thing is really a big issue when it's utilized at a mass scale. And unfortunately, in our country, it is. So you can kind of think of it like payment for a picture, so to speak, where the public only sees the picture that's been painted on the canvas, when really behind the canvas and in the production of the painting, there's a whole lot more that goes on. And there's a whole lot more that goes on to make the whole big picture come together. And that's partly what I'm here to talk about too. But because this is such a massive subject in itself, I'm going to speak on two main points that are within this one big issue, basically. In reality, this whole topic is pessimistic in nature. And because of that, I feel like a lot of people kind of turn their cheek when they hear about it or other topics that are related. But I want to make a quick note that ensures that we can make change. And it's just a matter of a vast amount of people being on the same page. So knowing we all contribute to pollution is step number one, to stop feeling bad about it, basically. So we all contribute to it, whether we realize it or not. And we should stop feeling so bad about it, as long as we are taking small measures and doing what we can to still mitigate it in the meantime. I feel like when a lot of people learn about climate change, they read it in like the news or just random articles, and they come away feeling really powerless and guilty, and often thinking that their contribution will make no difference at all. And I know I've felt this way. So multiply that by the whole population, and what's happening? Nothing's happening. No progress is happening. Well, maybe a little bit, but not enough. Not what is needed. So first things first, stop feeling bad, stop feeling guilty. You're not the one in charge of how things are run, but keep in mind, you do have a choice as to how much you support industries that are careless when it comes to treatment of the environment. You really vote with your dollar big time here, guys. And I know that I've felt very polarized, kind of all or nothing type feelings when it comes to this. Like, well, if I'm not doing everything when it comes to sustainability, then why should I put in the extra effort at all? And it's like, wait, no, you're missing the point. Finding balance is so key. And we do live in a modern world, and it's impossible to avoid buying things made out of plastics, for example. But when you do have a choice, I'm asking that you think about making a different, more sustainable choice. So let's get started. Point number one is faulty research. So one of the biggest issues with mainstream information about climate change that is released to the public is that it has been altered to look a certain way. This is due to the fact that most of the time the funds for these studies come from researchers who have been paid by the oil companies, creating biased results, as you would expect, I hope. One example of this is a study, big air quotes on that one, a study that was done where the results showed that cows produce more greenhouse gas emissions than all the world's transportation combined, making it contribute a total of 18% of all emissions. And if you're like me, you probably heard this and said, what? Because that's crazy. So here's the trick. The way they conducted this study, again, air quotes study, was by comparing only tailpipe emissions of cars to the full life cycle of a cow. Instead of comparing the full life cycle of gas and oil and the production of it to the full life cycle and production of the cow. So when they reconducted the same study, with fair comparison, the cars blew the cows out of the water, as you can imagine. The new results showed cows contributed less than 3% of global greenhouse emissions. So this is really the kind of stuff that I'm talking about when I say faulty evidence. Big oil does not want to get any more flack than they already have for contributing to global warming. So they are making sure that they put their spotlight on something else. Something that might be interesting, also an interesting correlation to recognize, is the rise of vegan foods and products as of late. If you take time to investigate the trends of the food industry, you will notice it kind of changes. It kind of changes based on the big companies who have the cash to fund studies that will sway customers to buy their products. Now that the oil industry has more people pointing their fingers at the beef industry, this is to their benefit. And in turn, veganism is becoming more popular. And a quick note on that, I want to make sure that I'm not saying anything is wrong with veganism. I'm just noting that kind of interesting marriage. And it's a butterfly effect too, right? So another thing to keep in mind is that when this study was done, it was using the data from conventionally farmed cows. When cows are farmed holistically, there's actually 0 carbon emissions, which I will talk about later. So this leads me right into my next point number 2, which is the way we farm our cattle and what's wrong with it. So the general method that is used for farming cattle in America right now goes something like this. So cows are kept in something called a CAFO, and that stands for Confined Animal Feeding Operation, which is just a fancy big word name for a big feedlot that cows are jammed into. The USDA actually defines it as an intensive feeding operation in which over 1,000 animal units are confined for 45 days or more per year. And in case you're wondering, 1,000 animal units means 1,000 pounds of live animal. So then, in this CAFO, they are fed typically either corn or soy, because that's generally the most lucrative, least expensive, so they get more bang for their buck. And in turn, the cows become very sick because corn or soy is not the natural diet of a cow. So now they have to be injected with or fed antibiotics so they don't die from the many infections they get from either the food lot or the food that they're given. And because they're all mashed up in one area, that means all of their waste builds up in one area too, causing more infections because they often become knee deep in it. So the issue of disposing all of this waste now arrives, which is normally done so in ways that gravely affect surrounding land or neighbors, such as dumping the waste into local areas that seep into people's backyards, other farms, water supplies. An interesting note here is the rise in E. coli in conjunction with our modern beef industry. So this is partly because most farms that are used for mass production of our food are in the same general area. So when cattle farmers need to get rid of all this cow waste, it seeps into neighboring crops, which can infect our food. Keep in mind, this is all, again, a really basic summary of the whole process. There's a lot more that goes into keeping cows, but there's the gist of it for you guys. On the contrary, the holistic way of farming works, is by letting nature do its thing, essentially, which is what's so great about it. And that's why it's so successful as well. The way it works is basically cattle are free to roam on land. They're way more generous than CAFOs when it comes to land wise. Like, we're talking huge improvement for sure. They graze on their favorite food and natural diet, which is grass, and they have room to roam around and go to the bathroom wherever they please. Because their waste is dispersed naturally over a greater amount of area, it helps to naturally fertilize the land, making it richer and more nutritious to grow food in as well. So we can actually naturally farm from this land too, which is so amazing. It's doing all the work for us. And that's something conventional farming really detracts from. It makes the soil worse because of the way it's treated instead of adding to it. So not to mention, one of the biggest positive effects of farming holistically is that there are not only zero carbon emissions, as I mentioned before, but it was found there are actually negative carbon emissions. So that means raising cattle with this natural method actually sequesters carbon from the atmosphere, helping aid our already far gone issue, climate change. So again, brief summary of all of it, all summarized in one, but that is amazing, right? You might ask yourself, well, why aren't we doing this already? But let me remind you what point number 1 was, which was about the agenda of big oil companies. So, as you can already tell, this issue has many intricacies, and it's extremely multifaceted, and I've barely even scratched the surface, but that is all I have to talk about right now. I do hope I have scratched the surface of your curiosity, though, so you can learn more on your own. I've provided some resources and links below, and thank you for listening.